Hello, hello, welcome everybody. Welcome. We're going to just take a minute to let folks kind of come on in over here. We've got a pretty awesome session today. I'm really excited to have Jay joining us. All right, people are starting to file in here. So hey, while we got more people coming in here, we want to know, are you folks using a service calendar? Have you used one in the past? Let us know what you're doing with service calendars right now. And if you've run into problems with them, we want to hear about it. So please go into the chat. Let us know. Everybody's hearing me?
Particularly if the service calendar failed, Michael. That'd be interesting.
Yeah. And if it failed, why did it fail? All right. So the question is, as people are filing in, are you using a service calendar? And if you've used one in the past and it failed, why did it fail? So this is going to help here as we kind of go down this conversation over here. We're just trying to get a sense of where folks are. Tough to stick with. It seems all over the place right now. We got some where they're brand new, not using them. Some where they've got started, but it's been hard to stick with it.
That's common.
Yeah. We're working on building a service calendar, and that's why we're here today.
Excellent.
All right. Well, let's get started over here, and we'll kind of keep coming back to this. So for folks that don't know me, my name is Michael LaCour. I am the co-founder of fpPathfinder and also a financial advisor. And I'm joined today by Jay Coulter. You might know him. He's an industry consultant with Resilient Advisor, and he's also the producer of the Financial Advisor Television, which we see all over the place. So Jay, welcome. I'm so glad to have you on.
Thank you. Thank you. This is going to be fun.
Yeah. So let me just kind of set the stage over here. We make checklists and flowcharts, help advisors be more diligent in the planning process, and help them look and be smarter in front of their clients. All right. So we've got a bunch of these checklists and flowcharts out there. And one thing that we've noticed is advisors were coming to us and saying, how can I use these all together? How can I create a system of taking different checklists and flowcharts and packaging them up together? And that really started to unlock a lot of different conversations over the past few years about the client service calendar. And we've got some sample service calendars out there. We've done this deep dive, like super technical, super nerdy webinar a year ago where we got all sorts of people to come in and we really went super deep in it. We got real technical. Problem with that, when we go really technical, it's easy for it to all go off the rails because there's so much complexity. And so when I got talking with Jay a while ago, we were just kind of riffing on this whole idea of the service calendar. And Jay was saying, look, I've done some of this technical stuff too, but you got to simplify it. And it just made so much sense to have Jay come in, and he's going to zoom out and show you how we can do a service calendar that won't break. And so that's probably going to be like the first half of this. Yes. We are recording this. We will send this out. There are links. There's more information. We will include that when it's all coming out. Don't worry. So he's going to spend like 20, 30 minutes walking through his system over here. And then we're going to keep it open afterwards. Feel free to drop comments in chat. If you have questions, drop them there. Erin's going to be managing some of this, and she'll help to kind of bubble up some conversation topics for us here if Jay and I miss it. So without further ado, Jay, fill us in. I want to know, tell the folks over here what you've been building.
Excellent. Thanks for having me. I'd like to start with a story, if I may. So 150 years ago, there was a young farmer, and the farmer had inherited 300 or 400 acres of land. And he spent the first couple of years working on the land, trying to increase the yield, but he became distraught. Every time he went to town, he heard stories of grandeur, of young folks going across the continent looking for diamonds and finding their fortunes in the diamond mines across the continent. So this young farmer then decided that he needed to sell his farm and, as the kids call it today, YOLOing. He had traditional FOMO. He wanted to go out and find mines himself. So he sells his farm to an older farmer in the area and sets out across the country. He's painting in streams, looking for diamonds. He's digging everywhere that he can find where he thinks there might be diamonds. But by the end, he found no diamonds and he ended up dying destitute. At the same time, the older farmer who had purchased the 300 acres from the young farmer got about the work of farming, doing what his family had done for generations, tilling the land better, taking better care of the soil, increasing yield, and putting in irrigation systems to better maximize the farm. One day, the old farmer found these shiny rocks in a stream. He thought they were interesting, so he put them on the mantle in his home. One of the local elders came by one day and said, "I see you have some diamonds on your mantle. Where did you find them?" To which the farmer said, "What are diamonds?" You see, this farmer had been sitting on 300 acres worth of diamonds underneath the land and did not know what they were. But that's not the lesson of the story. The lesson is of the young farmer who was seeking diamonds and didn't bother to look in his own land. He was, in fact, sitting on his own acres of diamonds. If you're old enough to remember, this is an old story that Earl Nightingale used to tell about making sure you take care of your own land before you worry about finding riches other places. What we're going to teach you today is how to look for your own diamonds inside of your own business in a very, very simple and systematic way. In my consulting practice, working with hundreds of advisors, what I preach is simplicity and systems. One day, about 10 years ago, I learned a lesson. I was about to present in front of a large wirehouse firm. It was a great audience of advisors, and right before I got up on stage, the managing director who had invited me said, "Jay, I know you love to talk about your systems, but let me tell you something about this audience. Do you know that old saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach him how to fish and you feed him for a lifetime? Don't do that. Just give my advisors the darn fish. That's all they care about." And of course, that was probably the worst presentation I ever gave to an audience, but it taught me a lesson. Whenever I present, whether on a webinar or on a stage, I make sure that we are giving you fish. Today, by the end of this webinar, we're going to give you the tools to execute on everything that we talk about here today. This isn't a veiled sales pitch. You'll have the resource to do your own client segmentation system using what we talk about today, and the ebook to then go implement it inside of your practice. And then Michael and his team are giving away 4 guides that we'll get into later that you can use to drive financial planning outcomes inside of your client service system. The key, as I mentioned, to everything I teach is simplicity. And I learned that the hard way when I first started consulting. Bruce Lee said simplicity is the key to brilliance, and Tony Robbins says complexity is the enemy of execution. At the end of the day, having built systems for advisors for a long time, I can tell you that simple systems get results and complex systems fail every single time. So if at the end of this, if you're not thinking, "Man, I spent an hour with Jay and Mike and boy, what they taught us, like a high school kid could have built for me," then we failed. That's how simple these systems need to be. There are 5 steps we're going to walk through. The first will be segmentation. Then we'll talk about touchpoint types. We'll talk about the frequency of touch points, how to add the fpPathfinder tools inside of this system, and then implementation. So let's start with segmentation. So I spent most of my career in the institutional side of asset management. About 20 years, I was at Lehman Brothers when they went down. Started a consulting practice. My thesis was advisors needed help building out their investment systems. And while that was true, I quickly learned they had much bigger problems. And one of the biggest ones that I decided to build systems for were around segmentation. So most segmentations are incredibly complex. The most complex one I ever ran across had segmentations that laid out what you see on the screen. They had a platinum, a gold, a silver, a bronze, a nickel, a pewter, a blue, and prospects. And I asked the advisor, I said, "What's the difference between blue and pewter?" And as you might imagine, he couldn't tell you what the difference was. It was too complex. But even more important, when I went to the rest of the team, they didn't know the difference either. That's why simplifying your segmentation is so important. I used to build very complex segmentation systems, and I narrowed it down to what I think gets results and has for the last half decade. The first, we start with what we call our A's. Very unoriginal, but it tells you exactly what we're talking about. Initially, and I'll get into the details of this, it represents the top 50% of revenue in your book of business. These are the clients that if you're an advisor in growth mode, you want to replicate. So it really helps to identify those clients. The next segment we call our B clients. These are the folks that we want to service, and these are the next 30% of revenue in your book of business. I selected these numbers by design. I'm sure you're tired of hearing about the Pareto principle, which tells you that 20% of your activity leads to 80% of your results. I'm just reverse engineering it. Let's go find out 80% of where 80% of your revenue comes and segment them appropriately. Now, the third segment we don't call the C clients because that gives the illusion that they're almost as important as the B clients, or I should say, said differently, they need the same service level as the B clients. And that's just not true. In fact, having worked with hundreds of advisors on this segmentation, once you identify who these Z clients are, the bottom 20% of revenue, you can typically find most of the problems inside your book of business. These are the folks with the long service calls. These are the folks that present compliance problems. And you want to make sure and identify that your service model is aligned with where they fit in your book of business. This is purely a quantitative lens on your book of business, not a qualitative. We'll get to that later. I wanted to share with you a full analysis that's typical of what I find in the marketplace because I think you may find it interesting. So this is an advisor with almost $500,000 in revenue, $150 million in assets, and 270 households. So as we went through the analysis, and he had reached out because he was overwhelmed by the business. You can see in his growth segment, where the top 50% of revenue, there were only 18 relationships. It only made up about 6% of his books from a relationship percentage perspective. And we were able to identify what his return on assets were in that tranche of about 46 basis points. Most of you on the call know, clearly he wasn't charging a fair fee for those top clients. So that was one opportunity to look into his book of business. But also, 18 clients represent the type of clients that he wants to duplicate in his book of business. We dig a little bit deeper into the next tranche, the service tranche. These are those B clients, the next 30% of revenue. There were 50 households inside of this tranche, and that represented about 19% of the total book of business. Saying it differently, about 25% of the relationships in this book of 272 households drove 80% of the revenue. Identifying this before building out the touchpoint system is incredibly important. Now take a look. If you currently have a big book of business, why it's important to identify that last tranche, the Z's. I call them the anchors because they tend to hold a book of business back. And this is a very typical example. It made up 73% of the households, 200 of them, in fact. And the ROA, or return on assets, in that tranche was less than 30 basis points. It was time for that advisor to right-size that book, find either better homes for those clients, or make sure that his touchpoint system aligned with the service level that's needed for that type of advisor. What you may find interesting at the very bottom, what I found after delivering these analysis to advisors, and this was particularly true in wirehouses, that bottom tranche, the anchors, it's so overwhelming. 200 households, where do you start? And I'm not an advocate of just getting rid of households. You have to find homes for these clients. And I said, well, let's just start. Let's identify the bottom 1%. And this is very, very typical. In this book of business, the bottom 1% of revenue in the book of business was 129 households, a tremendous number. And it only represented about $6 million in assets, less than $5,000 in revenue. Said differently, this particular advisor could have let go 129 households and only lost $5,000 in revenue. Yet, knowing where your clients are and making sure you set up the service models for them correctly starts with simplicity, and that's why we use this particular touchpoint system. To build your own version of it, we're going to give you a link at the end of this webinar. You'll be able to download the spreadsheet, go in, and if with very light Excel skills, you can build your own segmentation using this ABZ methodology. After you do that in a quantitative manner, which is just numbers and not the way the real world works, you as the advisor who knows each one of these clients can go in and say, well, you know what? The Jones family may have scored out as Z's, but really I want to service them as a B client. Or there may be A clients that don't need the service level of an A client and you move them to a B. That's where you put the human element into the segmentation process. So after you've segmented your book of business, you have your A's, your B's, and your Z's, and it's radically simple. You then have to figure out what type of touch points are you going to add. Some of the most ridiculous touch point systems I've seen were created by me. When I first started, I wanted to impress every advisor I worked with, and I built complex spreadsheets that were very, very sexy coming off the bus. I could tell an advisor when to send a text message to a client, when to call them socially, when staff should reach out, when they should send a handwritten note, when they should have a business call, and it was mapped out into perpetuity. Each advisor loved it when it hit their desktop. Each advisor loved it when their team started executing on it. Every single one of those systems failed because simple systems get results and complex systems like that fail. So I went back to the drawing board. I actually studied some other systems in the marketplace, and I borrowed things that I thought would work with advisors in trying to deliver simplicity and got rid of other stuff that seemed a little bit more hokey. Here's where I landed. In the simplest terms, we put touch points into two buckets: business touches and social touches. So when building out a calendar system, when a social touch shows up, the advisor, and I'll show you the cheat sheet that we use, has the choice to make at the time that there is a social touch required for the Jones family of what type of touch they would deliver. The advisor's choice, because the advisor knows the client, not some Excel spreadsheet. Here's an example from the highest value social touch to the lowest value social touch that I teach. Some type of wow gift. The folks at Oxley call it surprise and delight, where you're giving a gift to the client that it doesn't have to be expensive, but it's very thoughtful. The example I always use, I had a client whose grandson got a scholarship to play baseball at the University of Clemson, bought a couple of Clemson baseball hats, sent it to the client, said, looks like you're going to need these next spring. Something the client would never forget. And then going down the list, face-to-face events, picking up the phone and having a personal phone call where you don't talk about business, you're just checking in on them. Handwritten notes, which most people have forgotten about how to do. And then the worst thing that people do are the social touches, whether it's a touch on social media or an email, they're just not quite as effective. Typically, or sometimes I'll get pushback and they'll say, Jay, I've never really done these social touches with my clients. I don't know that I want to start. That's the beauty of the system. You don't have to, but I highly recommend you do it. And the industry research is very clear. Most of the clients that you're going to onboard in the next 12 to 18 months are going to come from referrals and introductions. And the best way to get referrals and introductions is to make sure you spend time socially with your clients. As an aside, when I speak with an advisor and they tell me a story about losing a big client, an A client, I typically ask them this question: when was the last time you broke bread with that client? Almost 100% of the time, they had not had a meal with that client who left them. That relationship was predicated upon them talking about portfolio performance or something that they really just didn't care about because they didn't know them personally. Make sure you break bread with your clients when you can. We find that to be really impactful. Business touches. So what I found in my complex systems is laying out all the different types of business touches that are effective in the marketplace and in my network, and telling you exactly what to do did not make sense. So instead, when your touchpoint system says it's time for a business touch with the Smith family, you as the advisor, customizing the experience for your client, you decide. The highest and most useful business touch is some type of advocate event, which in my program, an advocate is somebody who's referred a client to you in the last 12 to 18 months. And obviously that is a high value client in your book of business. Face-to-face reviews, phone reviews, review note, which I'll touch on in a second, and an email review. Again, highest value to lowest value, you decide as the advisor. The review note, this is a tactic I learned from one of the largest advisors in Atlanta. Known him for a long time. And what he does is, when it's time for a business touch with one of his clients, he pulls out a firm branded note card. On that note card, After looking at the client's portfolios to make sure that everything is still aligned correctly, he just writes a little handwritten note that says, I reviewed your portfolios today. Everything looks like we're on track. Call me if you have any questions, and sticks it in the mail with a hand-addressed envelope. Incredibly impactful in a world today where people don't have a personalized touch. Now, here's the cheat sheet that advisors will keep on their desktop or at their desk. So when it's time to touch a particular family with a business touch or a social touch, they can choose how to customize that experience and that touch for their clients. I have found this to be incredibly effective in my network of advisors. One question that I get for people who are new to the system that kind of drives me crazy is they say, Jay, what do I even talk about in a business touch? It's amazing, but sometimes for advisors, it's hard to think about what would I actually talk about when it's time to communicate with clients. When I came across fpPathfinder, I knew that there was a solution for this. Because of the way that the fpPathfinder tools are set up, it allows for the customization, just like we do with the touch points, for the advisor to deliver and have the confidence and remove the imposter syndrome around talking about financial planning topics with their clients on a regular basis. Said differently, you can build a planning-based client communication system by taking what I'm teaching here today, and instead of your business touches, outlining what particular guide you might want to use for that particular quarter. So I'm going to stop in just a second. I want to point out these 4 guides that Mike put together that we're going to give away at the end of this presentation that I'm recommending to my advisors who choose to use this type of financial planning format use this year. For the first quarter, the guide is what issues should I consider at the start of the year. For the second quarter is what issues should I consider when reviewing my investments. For the third quarter, reviewing the master list of goals, which is one of the best guides on the platform. And then at the end of the year, what issues should I consider before the end of the quarter? Mike, with that, I want to stop and turn it over to you, and let's talk through the guides.
Yeah. So thank you for this. We got a lot of questions coming in. There's a lot of comments. I'm making notes here. We'll address all of the questions and comments after we kind of wrap up with this part here. So for folks that are unfamiliar, I'm going to take a link over here and I'm going to drop this over into the chat if people want to see this. And I'm not even going to go into this. I could talk about it here. If you want to go down, feel free to. But we've been taking different guides here at fpPathfinder. We've been looking at which ones make sense to talk with clients at different times of the year. And whenever a new guide comes out, we see where would this fit as a touch point. And we just keep this list going. And if you look at that link that I just put into the chat, it takes you over to this document that we have. And maybe later I can pull it up. But when we were talking with Jay was saying, Jay was telling me that we need like 4 touch points. Like and he comes to me saying, I need the most important, the highest value touch points. What would those guides be? And I showed him our list of like 18 different guides and said, well, here's the ones you can use. And he said, no, really impactful. Like if it's 4 touch points. And we scratched our heads really hard. We came back with 6 and said, these are the 6. And now we worked on it more and more. And Jay finally convinced me what would be the 4 touch points that we really needed. And after we really scrutinized, we came down to these 4 here. And it's really, what should we be talking to our clients at the start of the year? What are those planning issues that we need to be thinking about? In some senses, it's really like New Year's resolution kinds of related planning conversations. Are we maxing out and saving enough in the pot? Like now's the time to have those conversations with clients so that they can roll it out and get the benefit all year long. And then the exact opposite of if people having a hard time hearing me or hearing Jay, I think everything's coming through for most of us over here. So it might just be an audio issue on your end over here. All right. Thanks, Jordan. So just kind of going back to this, now we're looking at the fourth quarter? What do we do at the end of the year? So now the whole year's gone by. Now's the time to sit down with a client and say, hey, there's some planning issues that we want to just make sure we've covered. And we deal with this all the time. And instinctively, if you look at these checklists and these flowcharts, they're all things that we all tend to know already. But it's the matter of making sure that it's all proactively there for us to reference so we don't have something fall through the cracks. So just like tax loss harvesting, are we looking at that? If you have a flexible spending account, you got to make sure you use that up by the end of the year. Otherwise, the dollars go away. Things like, are we maxing out retirement accounts or like making a contribution to an IRA or the Roth IRA? Like, yeah, we should flag that at the end of the year, even though like we still have some months going forward. At least we're talking about it now. Now, because we know a lot of advisors manage clients' money, we have a checklist in there that takes the whole investment aspect and then breaks it out a little bit more. So we're not just looking at investment performance with our investment checklist. We're looking a little bit broader about what are some of the tax impacts that might be happening there. From another chance for tax loss harvesting, if that's the case, or are we contributing the money? Is it balanced correctly? And hey, should we be thinking about Roth conversions at this point? And then Jay mentioned this other one, the master list of goals. This is probably my favorite guide. Now, in this case, imagine you and your clients have created the financial plan. Financial plan's on track. They don't need any updates in the financial plan at all. And their investments are fine. We don't need to change anything. So what do we talk to our clients about? Financial plan's fine, investments are fine. That's the master list of goals. There's always ways to find more things to work on with your clients. And for that one, you can slide this across the table or email it to them and say, let's go through this together. Let's find out other planning issues that we want to be working on. And that can create the to-do list going out over the next couple of months or going out for the next few years. But it's the idea of always looking proactively to find new things to work on as a group. So you keep providing that value. So those are the 4 guides. If I was stuck and I could only use 4 guides to work with my clients, I would want these 4 over here. And Jay, it only took you about 3 months to get me to nail down to these 4 over here. But those are my 4. I think that they work really well. But what we can share later on, and we can send it out later on as well in the notes and afterwards, is all the other guides that we think pair really well. Because some advisors, they're going to be in a different situation. They might not manage money. They might not want to be doing taxes, or they want to lean into taxes and they want to customize it. But the point here is like trying to find the 4 guides and sticking to that. All right, Jay, that's it for me.
Excellent. And we'll come back and talk more about guides. We had some interesting conversations yesterday that we'll share. Why don't we finish the system first?
Yeah.
All right. So at this stage of going through the process, you've done a segmentation that you're comfortable with that is qualitative at first, or quantitative at first, and then you've added your own lens, your human touch to make it qualitative. So then we talked about the different types of touch points. To simplify it, business touches and then social touches. And then in business touches, if you want to deliver outcomes based around financial planning, you now have 4 guides that you could use. So now we need to build a calendar. How often do you touch your A's? How often do you touch your B's? When I first started building these 4 advisors, even though I had simplified it, I was pretty absolute in what it should be. And I learned very quickly that that was not the right approach. What we want to do is customize this based upon how you work best and what your client expectations are. But we have to start somewhere. So modeling some of the best practices in the industry from other successful touchpoint systems. For A's, we want to try to touch them every single month. For B's, it's about half of that. It makes the math easy, but also feels like it makes sense. So we're touching them a total of 6 times per year. Going a step further for your A's, that breaks down into 4 business touches or financial planning touches using fpPathfinder, and then 8 social touches, with the balance for the B's being 2 and 4. I want to touch on Z's real quick. It sounds disparaging to call somebody, some client, an acre, or to say you're in the bottom 20% of a book of business. This system isn't meant to put somebody in a box like that. It's to make sure that you're servicing them to the right level possible. Most compliance departments are going to tell you you need to at least communicate with them one time. So when you build your system, at a minimum, make sure you're touching them once, and it probably should be, obviously, a business touch. Now, with this framework as a starting point, here's what I've seen advisors do. They'll go and say, Jay, there's no way I'm talking to my clients every single month. And they'll take their A's and they'll cut this process in half. Some advisors will say, you know what, Jay, I'm not doing the social touches. I don't think you're right. And they'll just take those off. But they will go and make sure they're scheduling out those 4 business touches with their clients into perpetuity. And then B's, making those same business decisions. What makes sense for you? Going through this exercise can be a little bit painful, but here's what you'll experience if you have any stress inside your book of business. Once you build this out and it is mapped out into perpetuity, you no longer go home at night thinking what's falling through the cracks. Who are you not talking to? It empowers you to know that you're touching your clients in a way that gives them the highest level of service that you deem to be possible. Execution and the technology for it is really where the rubber meets the road. So I'm a big fan of Wealthbox, Redtail, and Salesforce as operating systems for financial advisors and putting this tool inside of those platforms. In fact, I did a webinar with Wealthbox where I taught advisors how to put the AB Touchpoint System, that basic framework that we just discussed, inside of Wealthbox. If you're a current user, just ask them for the Wealthbox workflows and they'll put them in there for you. It doesn't cost anything. Inside of Redtail and Salesforce, if you feel confident enough, you can go out and build a workflow system to add these touches, or go out and add a task system to add those touches. So in summary, for this system, segmentation is incredibly imperative, whatever you choose to use. If you decide you wanted to be A, B, C, and D, or if you decide you want a blue and a pewter in your segmentation, that's fine. The key is to make it simple and make sure everybody on your team understands the segmentation. You want to define your touch points like we talked about earlier. Define the touch point frequency. Ideally, use a CRM. And at the end of the day, don't over-engineer your system. As I've said a couple of times here, the over-engineered systems, they just don't get results. Simple systems get results. Michael, that's the AB Touchpoint System. I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Okay, I've got some questions. First of all, let's go down. Can you pull up that summary page again where you've got your touch points? Yeah, that one there. All right. So there were some questions that were coming in already on the wow gift. Questions around the compliance issues with that. How do you navigate that, or how do you provide guidance to your clients with that?
Yeah, always check with your compliance department. There's usually a dollar limit rule. The key to the wow gifts, in my experience with advisors, is that it's the more personal the gift is. It doesn't have to be expensive. The more personal it is, the more impact it has. I gave the example of the family that had a grandson going to play baseball at Clemson. Another great example is a client was going on a 2-week cruise of Italy in the Mediterranean, went out and bought a guidebook for Italy. Just sent it to them, said, hope you enjoy your trip. And they took it with them on the trip. Oh, and all their friends used the book too when they were on their trip. Just thoughtful gifts like that as it resorts to a wow.
What we would do is especially if a client went in for a surgery or they had to go to the hospital for something, we would send a little gift basket. It was basically boxes of premium soup that they could use. It was like a get well basket, but only soups.
It's a great idea.
All right. So you and we were talking about how do you actually present the checklist or flowcharts? So let's say people here going, okay, I like these 4. How am I actually using this with my clients? Like, just walk me through your standpoint on this.
Yeah, it was an interesting conversation yesterday. So I should probably set the table for this. So most of the advisors I work with, they're $1 million plus advisors. They have a big book of business. They've hired me to come in and help fix some systems. And so a tool like this with the clients that they're going after isn't something that they would send out. It's something they would use to gain confidence in the planning deliverables they have for their clients each quarter. And you had mentioned something in our conversation about emailing it out. And I instantly thought, I wouldn't want any of my advisors
Yeah.
emailing this to a client, because their value proposition that they carefully articulate over time is that they're there to handle the personal finances of these families. We're going to walk you through it, not here's a checklist to go through and fill out.
Right.
And what you and I figured out through that conversation is obviously that's not the way every practice is or every family wants to be served.
Right. Yeah. That's an interesting thing. We have some advisors out there where they don't want their clients to just have receive the checklist through email. They want to instead sit down with the client and say, hey, this is the checklist we want to cover with you today. And they slide a copy across the table and they go through it together. And they're checking the boxes. What some advisors, when they really started to streamline this, they were running into an issue where they're going, I'm getting blindsided in these meetings. Like I'm asking these probing questions over here, and we're checking the yes box, meaning that there's a planning issue. And that means I got to dance around the issue because I don't deal with NUA distribution rules that much, but it's come up here. So now I've got to go back and do the research, and we have to have a follow-up call. And so what they came to us with was saying, I want this more interactive. I want to send this to my clients beforehand, so I'm not getting blindsided in the client meeting. So there's no right and wrong. It's really different advisors with their different levels of comfort in sending out these guides. Because to Jay's point, there are advisors out there that say, I don't want to overwhelm my client. This is my job, is to help guide them through this. And others are saying, look, I'm okay with them seeing some of this up front because it helps us set the right agenda for when we do meet. So for everybody here, like that's like up to you. We see some folks start off saying, I'm going to use this and just email, like I'm going to just give it to them during the meeting. But then as they get more comfortable and as the clients get more comfortable, so maybe year 2 or year 3, now they're saying they've seen this already. We're just like checking the boxes now. I can email this and I don't feel like I'm overwhelming the client.
Yeah. And after thinking through our conversation, Michael, like I actually kind of walked some of it back. While I would not necessarily think that the advisors I've worked with over the years should be sending it out in advance, but I do coach them to send agendas in advance so that the client can then send over any other issues that they might want to talk about. And maybe over time, including that checklist could be helpful and really a best practice.
Right. So I've got a couple of questions coming in just on how to use Wealthbox or a CRM. Like, what's the workflow looking like? What is that?
Yeah. So that's kind of that's an open-ended question. I'll speak to Wealthbox because I'm
Yeah.
very familiar with it. So in Wealthbox in particular, we created workflows. So we have an A client workflow, a B client workflow, and a Z client workflow. And if you're familiar with Wealthbox and the workflow process, we set it up sequentially, where the first month is a business touch, the second month is a social, the third is a social, and then it repeats. The fourth month is a business touch, and then a social, and so on until we have 12 touches. And then we incorporate a 13th touch, which doesn't execute 1 month later like all the others. It executes the same day as the last touch and reminds the advisor to reevaluate the client and restart the workflow, whether they should restart as an A touchpoint system, a B, or a Z.
And so within the step of the workflow, because you have one every month, are you putting in like, think about which social touch,
Not
or
at all. By
you've
design.
already you've already decided they're going to get the handwritten note?
Mm-mm. No, I'm sorry.
Oh,
If I didn't articulate that clearly, let's clarify that, because that's actually, in my opinion, what makes this system work.
yeah.
So instead, let's take the Smith family. You're an advisor in Wealthbox. It pops up. It's time for a business touch for the Smith family. Well, you go to the guide if you're using the financial planning system, or you pull out this sheet and you say, okay, what do I need to do to best serve the Smith family here in January? Well, it's probably time for a face-to-face review. Let's get it scheduled. Then they check it off as done. So the advisor is making the decision. Same with social. Take that same family in February, it comes up in their calendar. They're an A client. It's time for a social touch. The advisor thinks, okay, what's the best way to have a social touch with this family? And so let's say they live in the same town as that client. Well, they ran into them at the grocery store over the weekend and they had a long conversation. There's no need for a social touch potentially with that client. They just check it off as done. It'll show up again next time it gets scheduled out. It's that flexibility that's really helped this system continue and not get bogged down with complexity. Does that make sense?
Yes. So the idea here is just getting the reps in of communicating in either a social or a business aspect, and leaving it more open-ended as to exactly what's going to be right for that particular client situation.
That's right. I had a much older advisor once tell me after I taught him this, he said, Jay, this is just like an old-fashioned tickler system inside of a Rolodex. Now, I bet only half of your audience understands what that means, but that's exactly what it's like. It's to remind you, it's time to have a business conversation. It's time to have a social conversation. And then what it empowers advisors to do is never be caught in that situation I mentioned earlier, where you don't think you're taking care of all your clients. You don't know what's falling through the cracks. You know every client is scheduled to be taken care of.
Yeah. And we'll include links. There's some people asking about where to access this, but basically you can reach out to WealthBox and
Actually,
ask.
if you go to resilientadvisor.com/wealthbox,
There we go.
or you can just Google WealthBox Resilient Advisor and it'll pull the webinar up.
Excellent. So interesting. There's some cool books people are recommending about for a wow gift over here. Oh, if anybody's looking for a great book, Outlive by Peter Attia. It was my favorite book of last year, and I sent it out to a bunch of my friends and folks in the industry. So if you're looking for a book for your clients, that's awesome.
I'd also have advisors having a lot of success with The Psychology of Money. That book
Psychology of Money. Okay.
It's an easy read for the client, and there's so many great principles in there that you can convey in your financial planning or investment practice.
Jay, here's a really interesting question. Are all the touches individual to a client, or does it include such things such as sending performance reports or email newsletters? So it's like individual versus bulk. Where does that come in?
Yeah. So the way I look at the system, this is separate from Christmas cards, email cards, or any regular monthly correspondence you have, whether it's investment related or some type of newsletter that you put out.
Okay, so this is all individual focused, not a bulk aspect.
Correct.
So a newsletter does not count over here. The Thanksgiving card sent to everybody or the Christmas card, that does not count in this case. It's got to be tailored, handwritten, or something like that.
So when I talk to an advisor about their client communication system, and we're just getting started, maybe they haven't even hired me yet, and I'll say, hey, can you tell me when the 12th, 13th, and 17th largest client you have are getting their next 3 communications? And I can't tell you how many times they'll say, well, we're going to send them a birthday card, and then we send out a Christmas gift, and then, they get our newsletter. Like those aren't the touches that we're looking for in this type of client experience system, if you will.
Yeah. Okay. Wait, what about getting dinner with a couple of clients at the same time? How does that factor in?
I love it. That's clearly a social touch.
Right.
I would also say, depending on the situation, if one couple had referred you to the other couple, that's the definition of an advocate event. So some type of advocate event where somebody is an advocate for you, you want to make sure you show reciprocation and do something collectively with the person they referred, if you can.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, let's repeat that, please. Are we saying that a birthday card is not a social touch? Yeah. What about the birthday card?
Yeah. So you can make your own decisions on that. That's the beauty of the flexibility here. Birthday card's a great touch. Oh, so few people do it. But picking up the phone and calling somebody on their birthday, especially if they're an A client, is going to be a lot more impactful.
Oh, all right. So there's some Jay and I, we do differ a little bit on how we see service calendars used. The idea here is that there can be multiple ways. Personally, the way that we've structured our service calendar for the clients that I'm still working with, we do it more in a bulk format. So we'll send out, right now we're doing 2 different touch points per year. We're doing the start of the year checklist and master list of goals. One we cover in Q1, we send it in Q1, and then we might resend it a few more times depending on what's going on. And then we do master list of goals for the second half of the year. So it's 2 checklists that are getting sent out at least once, maybe more. We send it in bulk to everybody. We include a link to it. And then we say at the bottom, click here on the for a Calendly link to schedule a time to go over this checklist if something comes to mind. So that does not follow what Jay's talking about over here, because we're not picking up the phone and having that social touch in the same way. We're not doing the proactiveness in the same way that Jay is doing. We do it in bulk, but it's just highlighting that there are different ways to do this over here.
And it's about customizing it for how you run your business and what your clients expect. And that's the problem with most coaching and consulting programs. They give you a template and they say, this is what you should do. And that's not the way the real world works. And so I think the beauty of the platform that you have built with fpPathfinder is whether you're going to use 2 guides or 4 guides, which would fit this AB system that I teach, or if you're touching every month and you're deep into planning, you could have 12 guides. Right. You can dial it up and dial it down based upon how you want to run your business and serve your clients.
Yeah, I think that's well said. When I first got tipped off on the whole idea of service calendar, I was at a conference and I was talking to this one advisor, and I just casually was saying, well, how do you operate your business? And he said, I send 4 emails a year. Now that stopped me in my tracks. Like, that was like, okay, what do you mean by that? And he said, well, I send out an email in Q1 to focus on taxes, an email in Q2 to talk about investments. Q3, I alternate. Sometimes I'm due on even years, I'm looking at insurance, and odd years, I'm doing estate planning reviews. And then I just do an end of year catch-all meeting with clients. And I send out the email, and I'm just saying, if you're interested in talking with me, please schedule a time. And his data, which supports our own data, is that the clients are really scheduling about 1, maybe 2 meetings a year. But we're now giving them a lot more prompts during the year to say, oh yeah, I didn't think about that, but now that I'm going through this checklist, I realize I've got this thing with insurance that's been kind of gnawing at me. I should go talk to my advisor. So it was just like a thinking prompt for the client.
I've run across advisors, and this is particularly at wirehouses, and they're older, that do nothing. And they've got great big businesses. They say, I just wait for my clients to call me. It's right. Just how they built their business and what their clients' expectations are on the service level.
Exactly. Yeah. What about for advisors that run a mostly virtual business? That makes some of the social aspect a little bit more difficult about just getting together for lunch or something like that. Any other guidance that you have on that front?
Just customize whatever it would be. The key is to set up a system, a tickler, a reminder system to make sure you are connecting with those clients in that systematic way, virtually. It does eliminate the social aspect of it. And listen, nowadays, there's so many more ways to grow a business than there were even 10 years ago. The social aspect of this, the reason we include it is advisors that are geographically centered. We know from the data from Schwab and the folks over at Oxley that those referrals are going to come from your clients. And rich people hang out with rich people. And so people who hang out together, you want to spend time with and just be in those communities, and it pays dividends over time. Mm-hmm. But that might not be the type of business you have set up. So if your business is focusing on a particular type of surgeon across the country, social touches aren't really going to be an option for you.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Okay. So let's fast forward. You've now implemented the service calendar. How are you tracking its success? Are there KPIs that you look for? Is there certain kind of measurement tool that you're looking at?
Yeah. So the first system I built, I thought was really, really sexy, that told you exactly what to do, what day to do it, that always broke. It had a dashboard with KPIs and could tell you how far behind you were in your touches. And all those systems broke and the advisors didn't care. You could over engineer a process to do that. But really, I'll go back to the Wealth Box example. Here's how you know if it's working. You go into your workflow list, and do you have a lot of outstanding business or social touches? If you don't, you know you're keeping up with the predetermined calendaring schedule for your clients that you thought would be the best way to serve your clients.
Yeah. One thing that I've seen, and we talked to some advisors about, is that they're reluctant to get started with a service calendar because they're afraid that there's going to be like an onslaught of clients calling up saying, yeah, I do want to talk with you right now. And all of a sudden you're now meeting with your clients every time you send out a checklist, or you even think about it, uh, like all those business touches. And I don't know, like Jay, what we've seen on our end is that it's not a seismic shift. It's more like it takes a little bit of time for it to ramp up. Clients at first are going, what is this thing? Or they let it go. They're busy. They're distracted. Uh, what are you seeing on your end in terms of like somebody getting started with this and the client's initial response versus advisor's workload change?
Yeah. So I started this with the story that Earl Nightingale used to tell about acres of diamonds. And when advisors reach out to me because they feel like there's stress inside their practice, they're usually saying, Jay, I'm overwhelmed, or Jay, I want to grow. And what we find is by figuring out what type of touch point system, client communication system will work for them, optimizing it, and then implementing it slowly helps in a couple of ways. Number one, I suggest you just start with your A's to make sure this is going to work for you. Doesn't create too much work. You might decide that you want to connect with your A's once a month at first. You realize it's too much and you dial it back. But invariably, what it does is it generates more conversations with the clients that you thought you were connecting with regularly, but you weren't. And those conversations lead to better planning outcomes and then more referrals.
Yeah.
Happens every time.
Go back for a second. What about for the segmentation? How often are you updating or advising your clients and other advisors to review their segmentation? Is it just once a year, like at the end of that year upon the workflow review, that
Yeah.
13th step? Okay.
Yeah, it's a great question. Admittedly, I don't have a standardized consulting approach to that. Normally, somebody on the staff will say, "Boy, we're getting really behind here," and I'll say, "All right, well, let's go look at the workflows and see where you are, and then we have to reevaluate whether it's executing correctly or not." But I don't have a standard number for that.
Yeah.
I'd also like to point out, I just put a link to the Wealth Box webinar that we did. If you want to see how to implement those tools, I put it in the chat.
Oh, excellent. Oh boy. All right. So we're getting close here. There's a lot of chat going on over here. I'm just seeing if there's anything on the. Do you see any touches specifically driving more business through referrals or new money from existing clients? Is that tend to be the touch points at the top?
The social face-to-face interaction. In the simplest terms, if you're implementing the system to take care of your clients and grow, make sure you lean into those social touches and make them as many face-to-face as you can. It gets results every time.
Yeah.
I see a question in there about Redtail. I don't have a Redtail webinar yet, but we'll look to build one in the future because we have a lot of clients that are on Redtail.
Yeah. We do too. If we're not going to be able to go into it over here, sometimes we have enough time, but we do demos, and we have a demo coming up. Actually, I think one later today, and then next week we have a handful, like a bunch of times that where you can come on, and Stacia from our team will be able to walk you through and show how fpPathfinder's integrations with the various CRMs work as well. So go on to fpPathfinder.com and you can sign up there. And Aaron's dropping in a link over here where it'll take you right to the demo registration page. Let's see. Other questions. So folks using Advison, please reach out to Advison if you would like an integration. We'd like to build one with them. They just need to have enough advisors using Advison reaching out, and then we can get that built. So please reach out to them. And same goes for Right Capital. We'd love to do something with Right Capital as well. We've done some cool things with Asset Map and Holistaplan. And if you want to see more and get more, reach out to Right Capital. And if you want to see what we've been building with Holistaplan, you can join a webinar, and Stacia can kind of walk you through what we've been doing over there with them. But that's not service calendar stuff. That's different. So, right. Do we have any other questions over here? How do you, Jay, how do you factor in like one-time planning project clients versus AUM? Like, are you looking, how do you compare it if somebody has like a more complicated business model where there's different sources of revenue?
It's a great question, and I hate shooting from the hip with an answer, but I think you just customize the things that matter the most, segmentation, type of touch points, and frequency to how you want to serve those, and just schedule them out inside of your CRM.
Yeah. All right, so we're kind of wrapping up over here. Oh, well, we got more. Last question over here. Can you touch on qualitative segmentation? What does that mean, Jay? How do you kind of go into that a bit more?
Yeah. So the qualitative versus the quantitative. The qualitative says these 18 clients fit into your A bucket. You as the advisor know that from a qualitative perspective, some of those households you don't need to service at the same level as the rest of the folks that fit in that A bucket. So you might choose to put them on a B level service calendar. And conversely, you might have somebody that quantitatively ends up in the B bucket, but you know they're dual income, lots of planning needs, high income earners don't have the assets yet, but you want to serve them like A's. Then you as the advisor get to choose to serve them like an A client. It's part of the flexibility of the system.
No, that's great. All right. Well, we are here at the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody very much for their time. Jay, thank you so much for coming on board. And I will take a look at my microphone. See, this is the first I'm hearing this, that I've run into this issue over here. But thanks for everybody for working with us over here as we navigate different sound level volumes between us. And so, Jay, where can people go to learn more about you?
Yeah, well, you can go download everything that we spoke about today by going to resilientadvisor.com/fpPathfinder.
Excellent. And if you want to learn more, go to fpPathfinder.com to see more about checklists and flowcharts. Again, we'll send all of this stuff out and send over some more links as well in the next day or two. Thanks very much, everybody. All right. Have a good day.